This is HistoryNet and Mr. Brass interviewing the controversial apologist SJ Thomason. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
No problem.
Tell us about
it. It was my idea, really. It's because, really, we've had just a bunch of atheists on here, and we thought we'd change it up a bit and have a Christian on.
Oh, that's great. I'm actually trying to, I just found your live link, so I'm trying to put it out on Twitter right now so that other people can join us.
Tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm a college professor. I teach business management classes. So I teach this summer right now, I'm teaching human resource management and business communication. And I haven't taught this particular section of business communication to MBA students before, so I'm really excited about it. It all starts tomorrow. And I also teach leadership and some other classes, like a principles of management class to the MBA level. And those are my primary classes. I oversee our coaching program in our university. So I pair executive coaches with MBA students. And I've been doing that since 2016, and that's been very exciting. I served as the associate dean for 5 years prior to that. So I've had a very active career, and I like publishing on human resource management kind of topics and leadership, but lately I've been focusing a lot on ethical decision making, and I've been looking at things like objective morality. And so right now I have a paper under review at a really good journal, which I'm super pumped about, that is on objective morality and God. And basically it says objective morality is real, evidenced, and grounded in a benevolent God. So that's the theory. And then as far as Christianity, I've met you two on Twitter, and that's been pretty fun. I've been here since 2014 on Twitter. And so I've interacted with quite a few atheists and quite a few Christians, and I've been on YouTube a number of times, and it's just been a real fun ride.
Yeah. I mean, we both, me and Blanco here, have both been on your show before, so it's a nice change of pace.
Yeah, it is. It was nice having you on my show. So I appreciate that.
What made you want to be an apologist?
What made me want to be? That's a good question. In 2014, I was on sabbatical at my school. I get a sabbatical every 6 or 7 years. It's going to be a 6-year span this time. So I'm getting one, hopefully not this coming year, but next year. But I was on a sabbatical, and so I was taking a lot of time to write some books. And I started doing research for my school. And then I thought to myself, I'd like to do a Christian fiction book. So I wrote a couple of Christian fiction books, and then I went over to Twitter. And when I was on Twitter, I was trying to advertise them. And suddenly I started interacting with a whole bunch of atheists and other Christians and a bunch of people with different views. And so then I was interacting with this one atheist, and he wrote this blog, and I thought to myself, that isn't even compelling. And I thought, well, I'm going to write a response to that. So my first blog that I wrote was a Christian response to atheism. And so basically that one, it was kind of fun to do, and it got a lot of views. And so then I started writing more blogs. So now I've got about over 100 blogs on different aspects of Christianity. So pretty happy about that, and that's been going pretty well. I've been interviewing a few people and debating people. I have a YouTube channel where I interview some people, and I've been trying to find Christian authors recently who are kind of well-published authors, and so I've been interviewing them, and that's a lot of fun. What can be fun is the debates, and except for my last one wasn't very fun, but a lot of times they can be pretty fun, and so I've been doing a few debates with atheists and that kind of thing too. So I decided that debating anti-theists, I think I like debating atheists or agnostics or people like you two, who I'm not exactly sure. I think you're a deist there, and I'm not sure exactly what you are, Sparky.
I'm an
maybe you're kind of on the fence, but I think you two both seem to have pretty open mind, and you're pretty friendly to people, and actually you're kind of fun out there. Like, I watch what you do on Twitter, and I find it amusing because both of you like to kind of give people trouble. Like, you go out there and you plant some seeds, little troublemaker seeds, and then you like run away, then you come back, and it's like flourished into this big battle going on between other people.
No more, no less.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically everyone knows me on Twitter, where I'm just sort of like the troll there. I just purposely, especially like atheists. I just like trolling them on there. And it's very funny because they take everything really seriously. And that's always the best people to troll. Although there is one guy, I can't remember his, Ghost of Buckley, who's a Catholic. I believe you talked to him. I especially love trolling him. He's very
I haven't
funny.
even seen him in a while. Is he still around?
I haven't talked to him in a little while, but yeah, he appears to be around.
Yeah, Ghost of Buckley was pretty funny. Now I have to say, I saw Sparky and I can't remember this exact conversation, but it was so funny because he went and he found, like, I want to say it was the Rationality Rules group, and I think you just jumped in there and you said some tweet, like you put a couple of them together in a tweet, and then you left, and then like this thread broke out. It was like all hell breaking loose. It was really funny.
It's just easy to set them off and watch them go at it, but like you in particular seem to get a lot of flack from atheists, mostly the mean-spirited type, but occasionally some otherwise nice ones. Like, how did all that start?
Well, it all started where I had some pretty nice relationships for a while there, and then what happened was, I think it was 2017. I kind of got, like, it was the summer of 2017, and I started thinking that it would be kind of funny to start making some jokes. And so I started tweeting things like atheism should be an Olympic sports because of the mental gymnastics, and just little silly things like that, just totally joking around, silly kind of things. And then I started getting under people's skin, which I didn't realize was going on. And then by about August, they were all ready to just really kill me. And then I started writing a lot of blogs after that. And so I think that I don't think they really like those blogs if they read them. A lot of them try to write responses and plant them in still recently even planting them in my blog page so that I have links to their rebuttals of my blog. So that's kind of amusing. So, and I think one of the things that set him off actually was in 2017, I had this blog that I put out there that said health correlates of religiosity and atheism. And that particular blog, some people didn't like. So that was one that was unpopular.
Then there was also that time you were on the Atheist Experience that sort of jump-started it further.
Yeah, it was a disaster. They convinced me. They were very smart because they convinced me I was completely unprepared, just not ready for that kind of thing, although I didn't know it. And it was actually in March of 2016. So this is now over 3 years ago. I call up Atheist Experience, and I thought I had a little chip on my shoulder, and so I thought to myself, I'm going to ask Matt Dillahunty about the apostles and why they were so brave. And I thought I had just the ace in the hole. And he started saying that I had an argument from ignorance, and it was all these fallacies and this kind of stuff. And then he said something right towards the end of the conversation, like, "You're wasting my time." And I said, a stupid response. It just was, I said, "Of course I'm wasting your time." I didn't mean to say that, but I did. And he was super smart because he hung up on me right then and there. And then that set it off. And it's had that particular video that's 15 minutes has gone viral. Well over 300,000 people have seen it. And it's just horrible. So I went into hiding not into hiding, but I didn't get on any more YouTube channels for at least 6 months after that. And then I decided to start my own channel. Actually, it wasn't until a year after that when I started my own channel, but it was about 6 months after that I started kind of easing into talking to people on YouTube after that. And I decided, I need to do some serious screening before I talk to people on YouTube, because I've had some hostile interactions. So I've decided that from now on, if I go on YouTube, I want to make sure that I do a lot of pre-screening before.
Like, Dillahunty's followers are going to be vile to you no matter what you say. So I didn't really watch that episode, so I can't really judge it. But
yeah, it's not the best. But with him, that's interesting is he has me blocked, and he blocked me right after that episode. But then he unblocked me for a couple years, and then just recently, out of the blue, someone said something about him, so I went to look at his account, and I thought, well, he's got me blocked. What in the world did I do? It was like a preemptive block. So who knows? I should put down if I put on my Twitter, like, you have blocked by Aaron Ra, I guess I could say blocked by Matt Dillahunty. I don't know if that's something to be proud of, though.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's even blocked Steve McRae, so yeah, you're on a yeah, because Steve had dared to question the definition of atheism, which is a cardinal sin.
Oh yeah.
Steve loves questioning the definition of, in fact, Steve could spend all night long talking about atheism and agnosticism and what the difference is and how you can't be both. And if you ask Steve about that, you've got his attention for at least 6 hours. Have you found that?
Oh yeah, I mean, he's literally done presentations going over it and spoken for hours on it. That's why I always joke around with him. I said he's my go-to expert on agnosticism.
It's the Pope of agnosticism.
Yeah, that's what he calls himself. So he's a. So do you get along with him, Brass? Because I know I think that I don't know if Sparky. I don't know if you get along with him. Do both of you get along with him?
Not really. Brass does.
Yeah, I get along with him well. I always mess with him on Twitter as well and on Facebook. So it's always fun with that. But yeah, I have no problem with him particularly. I know him and Blanco do.
Yeah, I'm a racist white supremacist, apparently. Even though my girlfriend is Black and Rican, I'm that much of a racist, I guess. Like,
well, you're also American Indian too, aren't you?
Yeah, partially.
Well,
yeah.
I mean,
so my kids are 1/8 Indian.
Mm-hmm. I always joke with him about that, and I said, yeah, he's part Indian because of the fact some European guy, when he was coming over here, looked at an Indian and said, "Oh wow, look at that."
Like, with the anti-theist crowd, like, how do you deal with all the hatred and targeted harassment? Like, I even heard you've been doxxed a couple times.
Yeah, I have, and that's actually, it's pretty sad actually, because I have, in 2016, they started right after the Matt Dillahunty thing. They started tagging my school in on Twitter, so they would tag my school's name on Twitter, and they started contacting my school and sending emails to my entire department, the management department where I work. They sent emails to my provost, my president, saying that I was unfit to work and unfit to have a university position, and then it calmed down for a while, and I laid low, and I didn't get on any channels. And then about just this past December, they started it up again. And so they sent emails again to my provost and my president, and I had to go sit down in my provost's office to talk to him about what my Twitter account, what I was doing on my Twitter account, my goals with the Twitter account, and that kind of thing. And I've had to talk to my public administrator, our PR person. I've had to talk to my dean. They're all fine with what I do on Twitter. My department's fine with it. They actually comb through my tweets to see I wasn't doing anything that was, bad. And they thought I was actually, it looked to them, they said, it looks like you're getting bullied. Why don't you, maybe you don't even want to have a Twitter account. And I said, I have it for a reason. I'm trying to get Christianity out. I'm in a secular university. I don't teach Christianity in the classroom because, again, I'm in a secular university. So this is my sort of way to get the message out. And I've been pretty effective, at least with Christians following me. I've had some pretty good feedback, so I want to keep this going. So I just said, I'm just going to really be very liberal with the block button because I don't need the harassment, and I've had enough of it. I have all kinds of proof of people harassing me, tweeting that they're going to contact my school, and then they actually do contact my school. So I've got that saved in screenshots and that kind of thing, and I've done that kind of stuff. I mean, to go after my livelihood, I'm a mom. I'm at home. I'm the primary person who's working in my household right now for various reasons. And, I've got 2 sons I'm trying to support. I don't need that kind of stuff. It's just not fair. I mean, I don't mean to sound like I'm, but it's just not right. I don't think that going after a person's livelihood merely because you don't like what she does with respect to Christianity, that's just not right.
You got one particular stalker named Florida Line.
Yeah. She's been stalking me for at least 3 years now, and I've had her blocked for well over a year, and she still is actively monitoring my account from some other side account she has, and constantly tweeting about me. So I mean, that's to me not normal behavior, and I've complained about her. I've complained publicly. I've complained to Twitter. I can't seem to get it stopped, but that's because of her kind of tweets and the hate she generates towards me. A lot of other people have come after me because of that. And it's terribly sad, actually. It's really, it makes me pretty sad because I'm not trying to do the wrong thing. I'm trying to do the right thing. I know sometimes my approaches have been less than ideal, but I also know that the punishment I've received is not fitting of the crime.
You do kind of say stuff once in a while that is provocative, but the reaction you get is just uncalled for.
Well, I mean, to be quite fair, we all sort of do that, Engine.
Yeah. I just get back what I get.
Well, I mean, here's what's funny about, like, you know, with me especially, like, despite having a relatively small channel, I've had probably like 4 or 5 pretty good sized atheist accounts, and one Calvinist account actually respond to me, and literally for nothing really. Like, just for making a joke, they want to make an entire like 2 or 3 video response to me over a joke I made on Twitter. So it's like, yeah, I definitely can get that. I believe there was some other questions that you had, Blanco.
Yeah, like let us be clear that you are not a young Earth creationist or evolution denier, right? Like, tell us about your sentiments towards that.
No, I actually, you know, what was funny was when I got onto Twitter, not only was I not very familiar with the atheist community, but I definitely wasn't familiar with the young Earth creationist community. I really knew nothing about them, and I never heard about them because I came out of a Catholic church. I spent about 20 years away from Christianity. I'm back in a Baptist church, but we're old Earth creationist types, and I'm okay with whatever means God used to put us on this planet. So if he worked through evolution, I'm totally fine with that. So no, I don't advocate young Earth creationism. And one of the reasons I don't is because of historical, not just the evolution reason, but because there are some questions with that, but historical geology. If you go back and you look at things like the plate tectonics and that, the Earth is older, and it's, you know, what, 4.5 billion years old, I think is the estimate. And it seems pretty reasonable given what happened with Pangea and the way that the plates broke out, that we need a lot of time for that to occur. And so I really don't see a reason to support a young Earth creation. And I think if you look back in the Bible, there are various ways you can interpret Genesis. And even the early church fathers around the time of Christ, they interpreted Genesis not in the same way that we're saying it's a 24-hour day span and it has to be a 6,000-year-old Earth. They didn't interpret it that way. It wasn't until around 1800, from my understanding, that someone actually came out with this young Earth creation interpretation. And it was jumped on right around 1960, from what I understand. So the whole young Earth movement didn't really get spurred until around 1960. It didn't start really growing as much as it has recently.
But even then, it wasn't that big of a deal until like the mid 2000s. And a lot of that is a reaction against the aggressive, secularized, false dichotomy between God and evolution. And some people think they have to choose between one or the other.
Yeah, and actually it's pretty unfortunate because some people focus on Genesis and on that kind of stuff, like with Ken Ham and the Ark and saying dinosaurs were, you know, and Ken Ham's Ark, apparently he has exhibits where there's dinosaurs interacting with people. And I think that that's doing everyone a huge disservice, because when kids, maybe the parents want to be young Earth creationists, but when they have these kids going through the schools and the kids grow up a little bit and they say, well, wait a second. From what we're seeing from fossil evidence, dinosaurs were around hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years before people. So that's going to be a bit of a problem. And so that right off the bat is going to lead some people astray from Christianity. And so I fear that. I wish they would focus more on Jesus and the resurrection than focusing on Genesis and a 24-hour day.
Like, you know how many, it's such a horrible distraction all around, but do you know how many starving kids could be fed with that money he used to build that Ark?
It's true. Now, I haven't been to the Ark. Do you know Joel Edmund Anderson?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so he actually went to the Ark and he's got it on his YouTube channel. He filmed himself in the Ark with like the dinosaurs. So I think it's entertainment, but it should be taken as entertainment and not as a serious, you know, the dinosaurs were around with the humans 6,000 years ago. So
I'm gonna bring him on this channel one day.
Well, I mean, you have to remember that young Earth creationists see the Flintstones as a documentary.
Oh, totally. Oh, 1 million years BC would also be a documentary if it wasn't set a million years ago.
Flintstones is a documentary. That's cute. So, yeah, no, that's the thing. So we've got, you know, dinosaurs are around millions of years before. Suddenly you've got humans around, 150,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago, whatever it is. So then we have people saying, well, 6,000 years ago, all of this kind of stuff had to occur. The fossils, it's an enormous amount of activity that has to occur in that small period of time. Not to say God couldn't do it. Of course he could if that's the means that God wanted to use. However, I don't think that we need to bend around our science to try to fit it in with our interpretation of the Bible, which could have multiple interpretations, such as the metaphorical interpretation.
That's a lot more complex than that, but like, how do you feel about this bringing Jesus to public schools business that went on today on Twitter?
Oh yeah, that was today's. Every day we find some funny stuff on Twitter. Yeah, so someone had posted something about having that there's a group of people who are actively trying to figure out how to put Jesus into public schools, and so that's kind of interesting. Now I am okay with that, but I understand the side that's saying we need to keep church and state separate. So the thing I posted was the sign that just was approved in our state, in the state of Florida. They basically said that they want to see in the public schools, "In God We Trust." And I had a bunch of responses to that with people saying, no, you can't say "In God We Trust." But I should point out that "In God We Trust," Hindus would be okay with that because, and I've talked to my Hindu neighbor at my work, they're totally fine with that because they pray to a bunch of gods, and they're fine with the idea of "In God We Trust." Jews, Muslims, and Christians all call, we all have God. So it would be kind of a relatively small group that wouldn't trust in God. And if they don't want to trust in God, they don't have to. They're trusting in their own personal God.
That evangelical individual who has this evangelical Christian bias, and that's mainly why they're bitching and moaning about it. But like, a God doesn't equal religion.
Well, here's what's funny. I always tell them I actually came at it from a different perspective because they're putting it out as a religion is trying to get into the, religion's trying to get into the schools. And I said, yeah, I completely agree. We shouldn't have Jesus inside the secular public schools. The secular public schools are awful. They'll just ruin him. Like they ruin everything else.
Like, on one hand, I love seeing the left cry, but on the other hand, imposing Jesus is kind of going to make people resent that. Like, they'll come to resent it later.
Well,
like, if it's imposed on them.
I can see that point, and I think that's part of the issue, that people, there's pushback that you get whenever you see people, on one side or the other side pushing the envelope a little bit too far. The pushback comes in, and the pushback can be worse than what you expected. So, for example, what we're going to be seeing now is there's going to be pushback about what's going on now with the trans community, and we're already starting to see some of that. And so people are predicting that the right is suddenly going to have a massive pushback. Because of this whole idea with trans bathrooms and the trans athletes and that whole thing that spurred that entire mess between rationality rules and everyone else. So, what do you?
Yeah, and you know what I've been doing? Because you know what I was doing, like when this was at the highest peak of the movement, like when the trans stuff was doing, I was actually just making jokes at it, like on Twitter, just to see to see just how much I can get get people especially on the left to just yell at me to see how funny it was. And yeah, it was like one joke I actually made that did get some response was I said, "What do you call an obese trans person? Trans fat."
Jeez.
And,
but I don't. Yeah, I try to. That's one topic I basically have tried to steer clear of. But I do want to say that's extremely controversial, and that's going to be something that is going to is going to infuriate the right. I've already seen it now in watching people like Ben Shapiro and those kind of people who've been lashing out against that movement, that part of that movement. It's going to get kind of ugly because Fox News has a way, and other channels that are like that have a way of really firing people up.
Well, I mean, you have to know you can't cuck the tuck, man.
Nah.
Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
Oh, Tucker Carlson. Yeah. I'm not, I have to admit, I call myself a moderate now, but I tend to actually kind of lean a little bit more to the left. So I'm okay with, if people want, like, if gay people want to get married, do so. Go get married. I'm totally fine with that. So, because I want you to be happy. So,
well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I always say, yeah, gay people should get married. They should suffer like the rest of us.
Are you married, Brass?
No, but I've been engaged. So, and please note, was. But yeah, actually, that's interesting that we get into the politics. I actually had my own question regarding that. Seeing how you were at least a Democrat pro-lifer, was that a difficult position for you, given basically the pro-abortion stance that many mainstream Democrats are taking?
Well, see, I'm kind of in a unique position right now because I'm right in the middle. So I'm definitely still pro-life, and I definitely lean to the left on things like education and the environment, and the idea of universal health care and gay marriage. I lean to the left on those items, but I also lean to the right on other things. So there's some things on the right that get me fired up, like, for example, accountability. I think the right accentuates more the idea of high achievement and accountability, and doing those kind of things, of working hard, and I do favor big business, and I do favor free trade, even though Trump doesn't, but that usually is a Republican way to favor free trade. I tend to favor these things. So I put myself right in the middle. So I get actually kind of, I get people on both sides who don't like my position. So if I put something out there about universal health care, I'll get a bunch of people who are Republicans telling me how that's wrong. Or I just tweeted something about how CEOs make too much money because they make anywhere between about 250 to 485 times the average worker, depending on which year you pull the data. And so I tweeted that, and I got a lot of pushback. People saying, well, the money they make is fine. They earned it. Like, they don't work 250 times as hard as the average worker. I'm sorry. But so I put that stuff out there, and I get it on, then the right will come after me. But then on the left, I'll put stuff out there like about being pro-life, and the left will come after me about how I should be pro-choice. So it's actually kind of a funny position I'm in. So I'm kind of in the position that is very, it doesn't seem like it's occupied by many other people, but I tend to think it should be. I think I'm in a really good political position. I would vote for someone who had those kind of positions if they were running for office, because I think the moderate position is the way to go.
Like, the biggest objection from pro-choicers is that most people who are pro-life aren't really pro-life so much as pro-birth. Like, after the baby's born, the hell with them.
Well, I mean, I actually responded to that claim too as well, and I said, for one, even if that was true, that would not make the pro-life position wrong, because basically the pro-life position is just that a human in the womb has much intrinsic rights as a human outside the womb. So, I mean, just saying that, like, pro-lifers are being hypocrites isn't really debunking the pro-life position.
I love babies.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And I say,
I want to point something out about that, because I just read it today. It was in Joel Edmund Anderson's book, actually, and he was talking about Margaret Sanger, and she's the person who founded Planned Parenthood. And what's interesting about her that I didn't know was she was pretty awful of a person, and she was basically trying to advocate for this idea of eugenics, which basically says that we should be using evolution in a way to identify the best of the races, and to force sterilization on people who are dumb. Like, she said, stupid people shouldn't breed, essentially. And she said people with low IQ should have no right to have kids. And so her idea was that she was pro-abortion before it was legalized, way back in the early part of last century. She was pro-abortion and pro-eugenics, right around the 40s, I guess this was. And she also had this idea. She was very racist, but I know a lot of people were back then because it was that generation. But still, she had, now it's coming out of Planned Parenthood is the people who are having the most abortions tend to be the ones who are economically challenged, in the lower socioeconomic status, and many of them are Black women. And so it's almost like her plan of almost exterminating this group of people is become successful through Planned Parenthood, which I think is pretty awful when you really think about it.
Have you also heard in like in Iceland, they abort kids with Down syndrome?
Yes, and I find that's, yeah, I do. I read that they think that they're going to be able to eliminate Down syndrome in Iceland because they have this pro-abortion policy towards people who diagnosed with Down syndrome. And I can say, you know, when I was pregnant with my second son, he had 2 soft markers for Down syndrome. I found out when I went to get my second what's called ultrasound, and he had echogenic heart and echogenic bowels. And I'll never forget, the nurse said, "Well, you can just terminate the pregnancy." And I thought, oh my gosh, I just looked at a full baby inside my body. There is no way I'm killing him if he has Down syndrome. I mean, just, you know, I'm not murdering my child. So I went home and I started studying up on it. And my husband and I agreed that no matter what, we were going to have our baby. And we got an amniocentesis, and I found out that he didn't have Down syndrome, you know, a short while later, but I was going to have it anyway. I think that you should have it, but I'm not going to force my opinion on other people. I understand the rape situations and the incest situations, and that those, in my opinion, people should be given choices, especially in those situations. But and other kind of situations with the baby. But I don't like this idea of, in Iceland, they're basically saying that these Down kids are inferior. And when you look at Down kids, they're beautiful, awesome kids who always seem so happy and to bring so much love to their parents. So have you had any interactions or met, have you ever seen any people who in real life with Down syndrome?
I've met a couple. They're nice people. In fact, it's funny because they actually did a poll on this, and they say Down syndrome people are the happiest people when you poll them. They report more happiness than anyone else when polled.
Same with mentally retarded kids.
Yeah, and nice. People will say that, well, it's better for the person with, like, they'll say it's like, we don't want the child to be born poor and stuff. And I said, you know what poor people and people with Down syndrome have in common? They both pretty much like being alive. So
that's the thing. You want to give them an opportunity to do something in this life. Some people could start out poor and end up saving the world in some way.
Well, yeah, it's just a lot of stuff. Oh yeah, so another question I had: what made you get into your field and your scholarly field?
Oh, well, so it's business management is my main field, and I chose it a long time ago. Actually, I chose it when I was a freshman in college. I was driving down the road with my dad, and I totally admire my dad in so many ways. He's just been a tremendous influence on me through my whole entire life. He's a hardworking man. He's been CEO of a bunch of banks. He's done a lot of stuff. And I said to him, I said, what was your major in college? I didn't know. And he said, I was business management. So that was it. That's it, done, business management. But then when I went back to get my PhD, I was thinking either marketing or management. And I went into the university and I met with the person who was running the PhD program, and he was business management. And he and I really clicked. We really hit it off, and he started telling me about how he liked to focus on cross-cultural management. And I love international stuff. And so I went into that, and that was where I initially started. And then I kind of gravitated a little bit into HR. So when I graduated, I had dual interests in both human resource management and cross-cultural management. And so that's basically where I am right now. I teach one class on cross-cultural stuff. I haven't taught it in a long, long time, but I'm going to be teaching it this coming January to EMBA students. I'm pretty excited about that.
That's good. It's actually funny because my oldest sister is going into business management. Well, she was in business management, and I've been helping her out with her homework because she goes to me for it. And I haven't even took the class, or I'm not even in college currently. And I'm already getting her like B's and A's on her paper.
Wait, what are you're ghostwriting for her?
I'm helping her out with her homework.
Oh, okay.
I'm basically her tutor.
Oh, okay. Well, that's nice you're doing that, Brass. That's a good brother.
Well, she is my oldest sister, so she's like 16 years older than me. And so, yeah, I like helping her out, just getting stuff done with. I'm planning on going sometime. I'm actually working on it, and I'm going to try to get into mental health. I want to be a mental health counselor. So that's sort of my thing I'm going for.
Now, how did you choose mental health? That seems like a unique field, and maybe a challenging field.
I mean, you'd have to go into psychology, and you have to have at least a master's to be like a master's, or to be a mental health counselor. And once you get into that field, like the reason why I wanted to get into the field is because I've been to places where they've helped the mentally disturbed people, and I feel like that's an area where I have enough expertise in it, so I can actually help people out. I've always wanted to do some sort of job where I can meet people and actually feel like I'm contributing to the community directly.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Actually, it's a great way to use your skills, and psychology is so interesting. I've studied a bit of that, and I just absolutely love it. That's one of the fields that I could have easily done a deep dive into because it's really interesting. And James, who runs the Modern Day Debate, he's earning his PhD in psychology right now, so he's very focused on that. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, well, yeah, I know he was into psychology. I've actually talked to him a bit about psychology stuff and about how, funny enough, diverse places tend to be the most poor countries.
That's interesting.
Well, yeah. And I remember how atheists will always bring up the Netherlands, European cities, and Japan, and how these are all great examples of atheists doing well. I say, you know what else they all have in common? They're all
very homogenous.
Yes,
yeah, no, you're right.
And here's the thing: Japan, especially, is homogenous by design. Japan, back during World War II, and I think a little bit before then, they had race-based policies in order to stop tourists from coming in, murdering people of different races. So they say in Japan now, it's about everyone, the whole place is 97% authentic Japanese.
Yamamoto.
Yeah. So it's actually very interesting there. And what's funny is they say these places are atheistic. I mean, if anyone goes to Japan and spends more than 5 minutes there, and you see a Shinto priest around every single block, he'll say, "Huh, wait a minute."
I have a friend who goes to Japan. He says that there isn't a single corporate building that's not inaugurated with or not blessed by a Shinto or Buddhist priest. Sometimes both.
Yep.
And
That's
what's
interesting.
funny is they'll say these European countries are the examples of secular paradises. I said, none of them are secular. Well, I mean, not.
You have to know they can be secular, but we have to notice there is a couple things going on, and one is their income is, they have tremendous income. They've got capitalist-based economies, even though they've got they call themselves democratic socialists in some cases, but the economies function from private businesses and property rights, and so wealth actually, and studies have indicated that wealth corresponds quite highly with different factors, and if there's low income inequality plus wealth, you tend to see happiness, and so the World Values Surveys give us evidence of that.
Well, the reason why I say they're not secular is because the fact most of them have state churches.
Oh, okay.
Like England,
which
the
by
UK.
definition would make them not secular because they have a state church.
Well, also some people have actually questioned just how secular the Europeans really are, because even during the so-called theocratic Middle Ages, they've always had a more kind of decentralized religiosity in Europe. Even in Italy during the 13th century, most people didn't go to church every other week or whatever. I think there was a rule in medieval canon law where the common folk would only go to church literally once a year. It was usually for a baptism, or not a baptism, but a wedding or a funeral or whatever. And that's kind of how medieval Christian religiosity actually was.
And I mean, here's what's I just find it funny about that, because they'll bring up Sweden. I say we actually talked to an atheist Republican from Sweden, and she says, while the Church of Sweden has been, not been a state church in about 20 years, they say the government will still, act as a moderator between you and getting your taxes to you're getting your money that you want to be sided to the Church of Sweden. So if you want 10% of your income to go to the Church of Sweden, the government will be a moderator and make sure that happens. So,
not to mention, it also ignores the huge religious revival that's going on in the former Eastern Bloc.
Well, yeah. I mean, especially the fact that you consider all the Muslim immigration, you're going to be seeing a rise of Islam in these places.
Oh, yeah, and the immigration, too.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot going on. It's definitely something to keep our eyes on, because it's the way the trends are going. I mean, there definitely is an increasing percentage of people who are identifying as atheists over in those countries. It's not a tremendously large percentage, but there is, you can't really deny that there's definitely a percentage of growing. Yeah, well, they're either unaffiliated, which could just mean people like my parents who don't affiliate with a particular church, but they're still Christians, or they could be people who say there is no God. And so it depends on which studies you find and what they're saying. And the numbers I've seen vary so much that I wouldn't even quote them.
Well, also, that's also happening in the U.S., where you look at religious demography that it shows that, on one hand, we are becoming increasingly secular in the sense that you have the rise of the nuns, where liberal Christians are leaving Christianity in general because they're pissed off at Trump or whatever. but when you actually look at conservative Christians, their religiosity hasn't changed that much at all, and overall church attendance hasn't changed since the 80s.
Well, I mean, I actually did some research into that, and it's actually pretty interesting because people are saying this noticeable decline. And I said, if you actually look at the attendance rate in churches, you'll find that the church attendance now is about the same as it was in the 1930s.
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah, and another thing is that people fail to realize is that, I'm trying to think of how to word it, but with, what's really happening is, and William Lane Craig on the Ben Shapiro show pointed out this brilliantly. He says what's happening is the nominal Christians, like people that are basically just call themselves Christians for cultural reasons, and just for social benefits, they're realizing, oh, well, being called a Christian doesn't have the same social benefits anymore. So I'm just not going to call myself a Christian anymore. They never believed in it to begin with.
Yeah, that's also kind of what I was saying. Not to mention in Europe, you have a lot of the rise of kind of new neo-paganism. Like if you go to Ukraine, Rodnovery is really popular. It's becoming really popular.
Yeah, and you have to say though, there are. It was like 96% of people said they believe in God back in the 1940s under the Pew polls, but now we're getting the number more like 86%. So there is something going on that needs to be pointed out here in the United States. But one other thing that should be pointed out is the United States, given our high levels of income, we're actually kind of an anomaly because a lot of the other countries don't have as high of a percentage in belief in God as we do here in the United States that have equivalent or similar, gross domestic product per person.
Well, the only reason why these Europeans are able to, be all like, "Whoa, we're secular and socialist and cosmopolitan," is because the drastic expansion of the U.S. military. If it wasn't for that, they would go back to the eating stones.
I don't know about that, but it's an interesting idea.
Well, I mean, there's many reasons for that. For one, many of them don't have to contribute much to their military power because the United States does that for them. So, if we had China just decide to just give us their military, then yeah, you would see how we'd have a lot of extra money spent over, because that would be one thing we wouldn't have to be paying for.
No, we have our military is the money that we spend on our military dwarfs the money that any other country spends on the military by quite a bit, and so that's why we're in such great debt.
Well, yeah. I know we spend like more money than China and Russia combined, I believe.
Oh yeah, believe me, there's not another country that's even close.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate right now about our role in the world regarding Pax Americana, And some people are saying, this is part of the reason why Donald Trump won in 2016 with his original America First agenda. But, that's kind of been thwarted somewhat thanks to people like John Bolton. And, we're getting a bunch of tension and shit with Iran.
That's true. Yeah, there's.
All right. So I was also wondering, what are future projects that you are working on, if you don't mind telling us?
Well, actually, let me ask, who is that just joined? That's Robert. It says right there, because I don't know. I want to say hi to whoever.
Oh yeah, Robert. Yeah, hi.
Hi, Robert.
Robert.
Have I met you before? Have we talked before?
I wanted to do because I noticed that you said you did an interview with Brass and HistoryNet. I think I PM'd you, private messaged you that I was willing to do an interview because I was kind of like interested in starting a YouTube, or I already have a YouTube channel, but I was just kind of interested in trying to gain more fame by any means necessary. So I think I sent you a PM over on your YouTube channel. That was
okay. Well, it's nice meeting you. Sorry if I didn't respond or if no future projects. Right now, I'm working on I'm collecting data for a paper that right now is talking about ethical decision making. So I created some ethical vignettes, and I have other variables in this, and I'm basically doing this for my work. So it's ethical decision making and religiosity and the dark triad, which is psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. And I'm looking at demographic variables and political affiliations, and then the Schwartz values, and I'm trying to see how it all relates. And so I have some hypotheses that I created, and I want to see if it all plays out. Like, for example, if you have higher levels of religiosity, are you going to have higher levels of ethics, or is there no relationship? And so, and then how does that play out as far as like conservatives versus moderates, or libertarians, or liberals? And so I'm looking at all those variables, and then male and female, breaking it down by different ethnic groups. So I'm in the middle of collecting that data, and I should be done by about the end of December, collecting all the data I want to collect, and then I'm going to go ahead and publish on that. So that's one of my next projects.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually done a little bit of work on that sort of thing myself, and it actually is interesting to know. Religious people are more likely to believe that there is a set of duties that they are bound to than non-believers are. With most, like, more Christians would believe that, say, that there is a right and wrong thing to do, while more atheists are willing to say that right and wrong are just basically more just common sense and more of what science says it is. Two things, like science for one doesn't say nothing about morality really, and two, common sense is notoriously unreliable with morality.
Yeah, I'll to mention, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I have distinguished the is versus the ought sort of things in the the ethical decision-making vignettes that I created. So I have it like, this is how it should be, and this is how it is. And so I have people, going through these vignettes and saying, this is a very unethical situation. I agree it's unethical. It should be like this. It should be that. And so I'm trying to see how that plays out, so I can see if people's moral duties differ from their moral values. So the duties would be speaking to the ought, and the values would be speaking to what is. So,
well, I mean, you also have to take into consideration that there is principles and there's expressions of those principles. So you can have, let's say, the principle of love thy neighbor as you love thy oneself. Now, that general principle, you can say, is simple, but you can admit that it can be expressed in many ways. But you can realize that, like, while people may come to different expressions of it, they ultimately are coming back to the same principles.
No, you're right. I mean, we see that with like the Schwartz studies and the idea of benevolence, and other studies that have indicated that all cultures basically have this idea that we have a golden rule to which we should aspire. And so when we see that kind of thing, whether or not we, like what you're saying, whether or not we actually meet those principles, that's one thing. But we know they're there. We know that we should be shooting that high, but a lot of times we fail to actually meet it. So that's the is and the ought idea. We ought to be better. We ought to be benevolent, but here's what we are. we're sort of half benevolent. Sometimes we're nice. A lot of times we're less than ideal. So that's
okay. We're getting close to Q&A time. You got any questions, Roberto?
None that I can think of right now.
Okay, let's read. Brian G says, I think what gets under our skin, at least in the circles I'm in, is the assertions and misrepresentations of facts and statistics. Perfect example is the last debate she had with Nicholas Soter.
You know, that is a perfect example, because actually what happened after that debate, I didn't have the meta-analytic studies that he was referencing that I initially did have, because I pulled them in 2017 when I made a study. And I put a study in a blog. It wasn't like an official academic study, but I found a bunch of results from meta-analytic studies. And so I didn't have the papers right in front of me when Nick was reading certain portions of those papers. So what I did after I got out of the debate was I went back, and I didn't have it because my computer crashed in January and I lost all of my data and I had to try to rebuild stuff, but I wasn't able to rebuild that kind of stuff, like the papers I'd saved up. So what I did was I went back and I pulled all of the studies that he referenced, and I wrote 2 blogs that just one blog, all I did just to be as partial as possible. Is impartial. Is what I did was I looked at just the abstracts of the studies that he referenced so that everyone could see exactly what the author said the results were. And I just posted the abstracts, and that's on my blog right now that I tweeted out. And then I had another study where I went back and I looked at all of the comments that Nick made, and I pointed out exactly what my comments were and based on what the study actually said. And so I have 2 posts that when you get to the bottom line, you can make your decision yourself. But to me, it looks very clear that Nick did the cherry picking. He went through those studies and he identified random comments towards the end of the studies, and he pulled them out and acted as if that was the key point in the study. But when I pulled out the abstracts from the study, which is where any academic knows that's where the key information is placed. When I pulled out the abstracts, you can see what the true results said, and I just posted those to be as fair as possible on exactly what the authors were trying to communicate. And so anyone can look at those and you can compare them to what Nick said, and you can make your decision yourself. But I think it points pretty clearly that Nick did some cherry picking.
You and Friend of Forever might want to do a response or something. I don't know. Brian G also says, you're bringing Jesus in the classroom and you have to bring Satanism and Islam with it.
I don't bring Jesus in the classroom. I teach in the classroom. I don't bring Jesus in the classroom.
Satanism? Why? That's just being spiteful, if anything.
I mean, to be quite frank, like I've said before, at this point, the public schools should be begging religion to come into the classroom, not the other way around. Because quite frankly, if you actually look at the private schools that are mostly religious, they're doing way better than the public school system. So perhaps religious people, they have some insider knowledge that the public school system needs to take advantage of.
Well, the problem with the public schools is that they're essentially just daycare centers and public bureaucracies.
And here's
I don't have that experience in the public schools. I have to say, my kids are in the A-rated schools. I picked this neighborhood specifically for its schools, and they're getting a phenomenal education there. And I'm more than pleased. The only thing I'm upset about is the fact these crazy gunmen keep going into the schools and trying to kill these kids. So the security in their school right now is insane. It's super intense.
You don't live in California where I do, where the public school system is a dumpster fire.
Yeah, but here's I was in a chat with Biblical History Skeptics, our mutual friend. Like, he seemed to take issue with the fact that there's schools in Texas or California or somewhere, not California, it's Texas. They're teaching that Moses was a historical figure, and I'm like, I literally see nothing wrong with that. But his issue is that you can't teach. He doesn't deny the existence of Moses, but if you can't teach something that you can't prove, because that is a fact. We can't prove that there was a Moses, even though it's overwhelmingly likely, given that we see traces of cultural memory. But other than that,
I mean, to be fair, if you couldn't teach something that you couldn't prove, you really couldn't teach much of science or history, because we don't really prove anything in those fields. We just simply say what's the most probabilistic result.
Well, with historians, what they want to see is 2 independent sources. They at least like to have 2 independent sources for these historical figures. And if we look at the we look at the Torah and we look at the Tanakh, and we go back and we look at the sources for these different biblical figures. We have the Bible itself has over 30 authors, and if we go back to list specifically which ones mention Moses, I'm sure we have 2 or more. I don't know, right off the top of my head, I don't know exactly which ones Moses wrote and which ones were written about Moses, but right off the top of my head. But that's just something I would say, that we've got enough source material to justify that, given what historical scholars ask for.
Well, to be fair, Moses didn't write any of it, but that's another. He may have written. There may be fragments that go back to a Mosaic core, but he definitely didn't write most of it.
I know a lot of people don't like the Texan education system because their viewpoint over the Mexican-American War of 1846.
Well, didn't biblical history skeptic wasn't he the guy that he was saying he was mad about how they were teaching creationism in Texas in the schools?
Well, he's the one who said he was going to get in there with Satanism today on my tweet after I pointed the thing out about Florida with "In God We Trust."
Well, to be quite frank, like I just said, it would be, like I said, the public school system should be begging religion, not the other way around with it. And yeah, to be quite frank, I have no problem with the idea of having a religious studies class.
Absolutely.
So, if someone wants to make like an elective where it's just called religious studies classes, I have no problem with that. Teach whatever.
Didn't Trump just do something like that?
Well, to be fair, if Donald Trump's running the religious studies classroom, our kids are doomed.
Well, you get what I mean. He's not actually teaching it, but he made it to where it could be taken as an elective or something like that in the school system.
I don't see a reason why people shouldn't learn that. It's a legitimate elective. If they want to learn religious studies or world religions or any of that kind of stuff, what's wrong with that?
Well, yeah, but
they can choose themselves. If they're against religion, they can choose a different elective. It seems quite reasonable.
And Brian also asks, "You want Sharia law because that's how you get Sharia law." Basically, what? he compares the Christian right to Christian Sharia or something.
Oh, the Christian Taliban trope.
Well, here's what's funny. Like, they always overreact with the Christian right. Because, I remember, I think she's a moron. Michelle Bachmann. The Christian right. She's a moron, I grant that, and a crooked politician. But here's the thing: is people will always take her out of context of what she said. She said something about the separation of church and state is a myth, like that, and they take that and say, "Oh, you're saying America's a theocracy, or you want to make America a theocracy." But no, if you actually analyze what she said word for word, she was going against an interpretation of the Constitution, and she was pulling more for an originalist interpretation, i.e. that the government is just for, stopping a state church from being formed. So she wasn't denying it in that sense, that there is a separation of government and religion. She was just saying that, the specific separationist interpretation that most atheists take is not true.
Well, I think, that's another thing too, which is a lot of seculars use the whole church-state separation argument to quote unquote get religion out of the government or out of the school system. But then you'll see that they'll be propping up drag queen story time and say, it's okay because it doesn't have anything to do with God. So
I gotta.
There's something funny though.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just saying, the mention of Satanism, it just reminded me, I got in a funny little Twitter interaction with the Church of Satan just a couple days ago. And somehow, because what happened was I said the Church of Satan gets a tax write-off to somebody. And they found the tweet where I said that, even though I didn't tag them, but they found the tweet and they said they don't get any tax write-off, but the Satanic Temple gets the tax write-off. And then, so I went in, I looked at the Satanic Temple's website, and I see that they don't like each other at all. So they've actually got this webpage on how bad, each of them thinks the other one is. And so then I mentioned that to the Church of Satan. I started kind of teasing them, I think you're teensy-weensy bit jealous about the Satanic Temple.
I'm also for separation of church and state, but you know who else was? Jesus. Render unto Caesar.
Well, there was a difference.
I'm fine with that.
there was a difference between the separation of church and state envisioned by the American framers and those in Europe. In America,
well, that's why we did do that, because we came out of Europe with the whole idea of places like the Church of England, and it was all affiliated. So the idea here was it was going to be separate.
Okay, one last question from Brian for now. Ask SJ what her less than ideal approach is in presenting her arguments she referred to earlier.
Probably the one when I was talking to Matt Dillahunty. Is that the one?
I guess.
Probably. Well, the less than ideal approach was it was actually worse than less than ideal. It was pretty bad. So the approach was not ideal because number one, I hadn't prepared enough for the conversation. Number two, I acted like I had a chip on my shoulder. And number three, I hadn't listened to enough of Matt's videos to know exactly how he'd respond. So going back and looking out into the future, I think if I go on another debate or something like that, number one, I'm going to prepare a lot better. Number two, I'm going to not act like I have a chip on my shoulder, because that was totally ridiculous. And number three, I'm going to do a lot of homework by listening to a lot of the person's videos and that kind of thing, so I can see how they respond in these questions. So I'm gonna take a lot more time and not just jump onto any YouTube channel with a person to debate with. So,
okay. Kuhn asks questions for SJ. How do you feel about apatheists?
Apathy. Well, so is that the idea that people are apathetic towards religion? I think that's what that is.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think that that's a big fear, actually, because I think that there's more people who are, even though they don't say it, I think there's a lot of weak Christians who are apatheists, and I probably could have called myself one for about 20 years, and it's, you know, there are a lot of people who just really don't care. There was a guy who just sent a tweet that I spotted on Twitter today, that he said he's in France, and people in France where he is, at least in his area, they really just don't care about God. And so I think it's kind of sad, because I think God gives everyone hope. So it's, to me, it's very sad that people would have so much empathy. But I think that the wealthier countries are seeing more of that. You know, once you don't have suffering as much and you've got a wealthy social safety nets and that kind of thing, that's why in Europe, the studies have indicated there's less suffering there, you know, ratings of what they consider that. And there's also higher levels or lower levels, I should say, of humanist orientation, the lowest level being West Germany, former West Germany.
Ask MST asks, ask her what she thinks of inerrancy or Bible contradictions. Thumbs up.
I think the Bible is inerrant, and I think that any of the contradictions are not provable, meaning that you can always come up with a reason. There's nothing that's a direct contradiction, like the chair is here, no, the chair is there at the exact same time. That would be a contradiction. But you know, sometimes you'll say the chair is here, and then in other different part of the passage, they might say, oh, the chair is over there, but you could realize there could be a passage of time between the 2 points when the people reported it.
Brian G's comment earlier was in regards to bringing religion back in the classroom. Your less than ideal approach.
To religion back in the classroom? Well, I don't bring, in my classroom, I'm in a secular school, so I don't teach religion. So religion is not in my classroom. So so that's not in my own classroom. But as far as the public schools, if they want to have religious studies or something like that, I'm fine with that. And I'm actually okay, even though this might be controversial, I don't mind the idea in my state where they have signs that say, "In God we trust." If they think that might cut down on the amount of people going in there with guns, or I think that's what they think. So I think that's their justification for that after what happened down in what's it called? Parkland.
There's a lot of questions tonight. Let's see. Yeah, we got that part. And Brian thinks you're being dishonest, but
I could tell he's a member of my fan club, right? I get a lot of enemies somehow. Who knows how?
This is not really a question, but Sadie Maureen Jones says the world would be a better place without religion in it. which is utterly wrong. But
yeah, you know, I think one of the main reasons that I think religion is good is because, especially the Christian religion, is the idea of trying to act like Jesus. If everyone actually tried to act like Jesus, it'd be a pretty good deal out there.
Absolutely.
I mean, I understand there are bad people in all these different groups, but and there are bad Christians. I mean, look at the people in Ireland constantly fighting all the time, you know, and that kind of thing. And we've got different groups doing different things. The YECs out there disagreeing with the OECs and that kind of thing. But all in all, if people would just sort of switch gears and focus on our source, I think that would make a lot of sense.
Well, and I'm not a big fan of the whole, the world would be a better place without religion, because like these people who say that, they haven't proposed a good solution, a good historical example of one being produced. I mean, all their examples are like these one-offs, like, you know, secular Europe, as they say, which, you know, is really controversial.
Yeah, that's the thing, is you wonder what will people, I mean, what sort of external accountability will people feel if there isn't, if they don't think there's a God? And you go back into, and I hate to bring this up, but if you go back into Soviet Russia and you look at the way that atheism had been leading that economy, and it's not really atheism, the communism belief that they had at that time during Stalin and Lenin, is they felt that people were pretty expendable. The state was what was important, and Marxism was what was important. And if people didn't agree with them, specifically capitalists or Christians, they got rid of 50 million Christians in Russia, I read.
Not to mention other religions were targeted too, like even some Buddhists and
yes,
the Islamic areas.
You're right. You're right. Absolutely.
And I was going to say the same thing. It was also the same thing in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge. My ex-girlfriend is the daughter of Khmer Rouge genocide survivors, and they told me one time about witnessing a Buddhist monk who had his eye, who had a lit cigarette shoved into his eye, and I literally shed a tear when I heard that story. And
that's horrible.
Yeah, they were trying to get rid of the Buddhist clergy there, and it was really horrendous. There's something else I was going to say, but I forget now. Oh, I was going to say, yeah, you tend to notice that when religion goes away, either, you know, forcibly or, you know, just because people become more secular or wealthy or whatever, you tend to notice that a lot of these weird new ideologies emerge. Like right now, we're seeing kind of the rise of, in the United States and in the West in general, as Christianity is declining, we're seeing the rise of kind of like alt-right white nationalism, and a lot of that has to do with like neo-paganism.
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing a rise in what people call themselves as spiritual instead of being necessarily Christian. Like they might say we're spiritual, they kind of lean a little bit towards the Buddhist idea, and so we do see some of that too. Like Sam Harris is an example. He was an atheist, but I think now he's kind of latching on to some of the Buddhist ideas and calling himself more of a spiritual person, even though Buddhists can be atheists. So I think he might be putting himself into that camp, a spiritual atheist Buddhist sort of person.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. And well, I just mentioned that because like I read a book in high school that I still have called it was by an author named Carla Poe, and it was called New Religions and the Nazis. And it basically talked about how after World War I in Weimar Germany, there had been this huge crisis of and loss of faith, you know, in the mainstream German religion, which was Christianity. And this author mentioned how in place of that, you had a lot of these new kind of what she called new Aryan religions that kind of glorified the German race and whatnot. And that became really popular in the 1920s. And so by the time Hitler came around, it was kind of the norm, and it really helped justify a lot of the atrocities in Nazi Germany, these new Aryan religions.
Well, that was their view. That was the thing that Hitler did. He did a few things. One is he tried to capitalize on religion and tried to capitalize on Christianity, even though he stated privately many times that he did not like Christianity, wanted to stamp it out. But he knew that he could use Christianity as a vehicle to make his ideas get through to some of the Christians who were in Germany. But what he did that was really bad was he went into eugenics, which is again the idea of trying to, like how you breed dogs into really bigger dogs or smaller dogs. He wanted to breed a better human race. And so that was his whole idea. He would exterminate these portions of the human race that he considered inferior. And he would instead just try to go for the Aryan race that he invented. And so that was his whole thing. And so going back to that, I mean, thank God we got out of that. Imagine the world if he would have somehow won that war.
Yeah. A lot of those viewpoints, as explained by Dr. Carla Powell in that book, she mentions were because of the new Aryan religions that were emerging in Germany after World War I, and people had lost faith in Christianity during the Weimar era.
Yeah, it was a scary time. I can't even imagine how living back then would have been terrible. We're living in a pretty good time. I mean, a lot of times people complain, but I'd say all in all, this is a pretty ideal time to live. If we need information, we just pick up our phone. It takes about 2 seconds. It's like in the old days when I was young, we had to go to the library to get our information, and we had to use a typewriter, and we didn't have easy access to really much at all.
So, no, I would disagree. I would disagree. It's a shitty time to live.
Well,
the 90s was the best time to live.
90s were fun.
Oh, the 90s was the best time to live.
I barely remember the 90s. I was born in 93, and
I'm sorry.
I remember a lot of the 2000s. I remember some of the 90s, but not a whole lot.
I'm sorry.
I remember it pretty well. It was a fun time. 80s were fun too, for that matter.
Well, in the 90s, you had like this huge optimism because the Soviet Union was gone. We had just defeated Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War. And you see it in the movies like Independence Day, humanity always triumphs and whatnot. But when 9/11 breaks out, you begin to see a huge, change. There's more of a theme of worrying a lot. And you see that in movies like War of the Worlds, War of the Worlds in the 2005 one with Tom Cruise is supposed to be like a metaphor for the post 9/11 world where we're always worried about terrorism.
Yeah. Well, I guess there is something to be said. Jonathan Haidt puts out a lot of stuff that kind of scares me as far as the generation right now and the negative impact on social media to the younger generation and how it's increased depression and it's increased suicide. So there is something to be said that's pretty scary as far as that.
But now culture is pretty much dead. Like this is the year Blade Runner and Akira were supposed to happen.
That's I think the major threat is this rise of aculturalism, as forget the professor's name, but he talks about how generally culture is just dying. Even though we live in a relatively comfortable time, and thank God we do, but culture is a huge aspect as to why civilization, society functions, and that's dying. And if that dies, then the civilization begins to collapse.
Well, yeah, no doubt the technology is, we're technologically advanced, but people are just getting dumber, it seems. You got all these SJWs everywhere and entertainment's at an all-time low, and it's just terrible.
Oh, Patrick Deneen was the guy I was referring to. He was the one who came up with the theory of aculturalism.
All right, we should be wrapping up. Any closing thoughts?
Well, I want to say thank you for having me.
I wish I would have shown up sooner. I would have gotten questions and whatnot. I just decided to crash land this interview.
I sent you.
It was fun having you, though.
Huh?
I said it was fun having SJ on.
Oh, well, thank you. I'd come on again, and I'd like to have any of you guys on my channel if you ever want to come on there.
Sure, I'd love to do an interview sometime.
Okay.
Excellent.
This has been HistoryNet and Mr. Brass and Robert Freid interviewing the controversial apologists. See you next time.
That's what on you.